And Charles Power, On3 recruiting director, also handles the rankings with On3 national rankings and recruiting, but was also, along with others, at the Elite 11 camp out on the West Coast. He joins us on 365 Sports, Craig Smoak and David Smoak. Charles, thanks for your time. One, did you ever get over all of the delays and the flights to just get back home after the weekend?
Oh, yeah, I did. It actually wasn't nearly – it was not nearly as bad as it was around Christmas time, New Year's, when I was going to the Under Armour and All-American Bowl when all of Southwest flights went down. So as long as I don't have to get in the car and drive 14 hours, I'm good.
Yeah, okay. Well, thanks for being a part of the show. So
Sure.
this camp, this Elite 11, of course, it's blossomed into what it is. It's always been good. Was there a lot of separation among the group that were there? Did you have tiers? Did you feel like tiers of players' performances?
I think so. This year, I think there's always tiers. This year it probably was a little different. I think this 24 recruiting, the 24 cycle with quarterbacks, it's not like the strongest or deepest, especially relative to last year, which I thought was particularly very deep. I think there's a lot of guys who were 4-star types who could be, high NFL draft picks, that were quarterbacks in 2023. So 2024 does not appear to be that deep. So I think, that kind of informs typically the group we get to see at the Elite 11. So, I think there was a little bit tier, especially too, it's a unique event in that it's probably the most objective thing we do on the recruiting calendar, at least from my perspective, because I think everybody kind of goes into it with different criteria, right? So are you dissecting the performance in a vacuum at the camp? Are you looking at traits that project long term? I mean, I try to do both and make our rankings of it a combination of both. But everybody's criteria differs. I guess that's all to say. Just from the event, I thought Julian Sayin, the Alabama commit, who was the Elite 11 counselors MVP and also our MVP, and Dylan Raiola, the 5-star who's committed to Georgia. I thought those two probably were a slight tier above the rest. And then after that, Ethan Grunkemeyer, the Penn State commit, was probably the most pleasant surprise out of the group. The Florida State commit, Luke Kromenhoek, I thought maybe showed the most upside of anybody there. And then the Ohio State commit, Aaron Noland, was just very, very solid. So I probably would stop at kind of that first tier of the top two, and the next three, I think, were probably the two most defined tiers of the 20 guys we saw.
Charles, we got a chance to check out Hauss Hejny in a playoff game last year, and he was an impressive guy. TCU obviously has got a pretty good run going right now with momentum, and he was their selection for this 24 class. What can you tell us about what you picked up from eyeing Hauss Hejny up close and personal, and how you think that factors into what TCU does with Sonny Dykes?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I thought Hauss Hejny was very impressive, and this is a setting that it really is not tailored to his strengths, right? Hauss Hejny is arguably the most athletic quarterback in this cycle. This is a guy who runs an electronic 4.4. He's a sub-11 100-meter guy, so he can really, really run. And you put on the film, I'm sure y'all probably saw this in person and watched him in the playoffs, and he got better as the season went on as a first-year starter. So he was really peaking in the playoffs, but he can run away from defensive backs. So seeing him in this passing setting, I thought he was very impressive. His velocity on short to intermediate passes, I think, was in the top group. He's not a guy who has immense physical tools from just a pure passing perspective, right? He's probably 5'11", 185, not going to blow you away from a stature perspective. Kind of smaller hands, so he really throws with his whole body. He generates a lot of his power via torque and just core power. And when you watch him throw, he's putting everything into it. So he's kind of maximizing just his physical ability just as a passer. But I thought I think he finished 8th for us in our subjective ranking. So it was a really good showing for Hauss, and I think he's gonna have a really good senior year. And he was kind of playing receiver a little bit as a sophomore. Last year was his first year as a starter at Alito. So I think this was just a lot of positive momentum for him going into the fall. And I think if you look at just how he projects in TCU's offense, in Kendall Briles' scheme, I kind of think I could see them using him a little bit how Briles used Derek King that year at Houston, where he could just move around, do some unique stuff in the run game with him. He's different, but I really think he has a really good shot of being a very good college quarterback and a multi-year starter at TCU if the depth chart shakes the right way for him.
Charles, I want to make sure, is it Julian Sayin exactly the way it's spelled, or is it like okay, I was making sure. Alabama had the commitment to transfer with Buckner because there was concerns about maybe their quarterback play, Milroe, and who else was on the roster. They've got good young players, yet they have one apparently that's on his way. Is he that kind of player that we've seen at Alabama? I know Bennett at Georgia was not highly thought of, and he won a couple of national titles, but is this what Alabama would be used to?
I think so. I think it's Alabama getting back to recruiting the type of quarterbacks that they had when they had that run of Tua, Jalen Hurts, Mac Jones. I think he's in line with that group. I think Julian Sayin of this 24 quarterback cycle is probably the safest. He's a guy who is just very technically refined, extremely accurate. I think he's probably the most accurate quarterback at the Elite 11. And I was fortunate enough to go see him at the OT7 finals 2 days after the Elite 11. He went over and played the last day there. And honestly, what he did that day at the OT7 finals was even more impressive than what he did at the Elite 11. I mean, it was one of the better 7-on-7 performances I've seen from a quarterback in a couple years. Probably the best I've seen since probably Drake May. I saw Drake May right before the pandemic in 7-on-7, and Sayin would have been that caliber. It was just very impressive with his timing and accuracy. He's not necessarily going to blow you away like on the hoof, just kind of seeing he's probably a little over 6'1", and more of a pocket passer, but he's extremely accurate and surgical and not a small guy at all. I mean, you go stand up beside him, he's not like a Bryce Young deal where he's like 5'10", but he is extremely good, and I think he'll push as a top quarterback in this cycle before it's all said and done.
We've heard a lot about Dylan Raiola, and we follow along kind of with Matt Rule a bit because he was here at Baylor for a time, and rooting for him to do well at Nebraska. Missed out on the big connection, legacy connection there, but Georgia's on fire, so it's understandable. And they've actually got a couple of quarterbacks that were at this camp. What do you see though from Raiola? Why is there so much buzz about him for people who've been hearing that name and have been following along in recruiting? What is it about him that makes him stand out so much?
Yeah, I mean, Dylan Raiola, he's been the big name in this cycle really since his sophomore year at Burleson. I think you go back and just look at what he was doing as a 10th grader. It was just very advanced, and he was making like no look passes, and just the arm talent jumped off the tape for him. He just got he was very developed physically. I think he probably was like 6'3", 215 as a 10th grader. So he's one who's been on the scene for a while, and I think developed a little earlier than this group. But seeing him out there at the Elite 11, I think he kind of served as a little bit of a reminder, coming off of I think it's safe to say just a disappointing junior year at Chandler High School in Arizona. I think he had a very positive showing at the Elite 11, and it was a little bit of a reminder of hey, there's a reason why I'm a 5-star. And I thought he answered the bell in a competitive situation, which I thought was really encouraging. Just a lot of arm strength, but throws with a lot of touch as well, and can layer his throws. I thought he had the best deep ball at the event, and got better as the week went on. Had a really good pro day, and probably had the best 7-on-7 session of that group as well. With him, it's just a very interesting evaluation because he's now been to 4 high schools. His sophomore year was probably his best year so far, so there's going to be a lot of eyes on him as a senior. Just from my experience in doing this, I think how these quarterbacks play, particularly as seniors, tends to be the most predictive evaluation point we have for the most part. So all of these guys are going to be watching really closely, but Dylan Raiola is going to have a lot of eyes on him this fall. He just announced he was transferring yesterday to Buford High School, powerhouse in Georgia, where he'll team up with a bunch of highly touted recruits. A lot of blue chip recruits are on that team. So it'll be very interesting to see how that plays out, but I thought he had a very encouraging performance at the Elite 11.
Charles, was there someone that perhaps does not get a lot of ink because there were some 5 stars and some that get more attention than others, but were there one or two that perhaps are sometimes overlooked that popped out at you as, man, maybe we need to look at where they are, and also they just look really good and right in the middle of it?
Yeah, I would probably start with the Penn State commit, Ethan Buckemeyer. Just from a pure passing perspective, like his mechanics, the way the ball came out of his hand, he was as good as anybody there. He's a guy who I believe is a 3-star across the board in the industry, and I would suspect that'll change. He's probably a little better in camp settings than he is just on Friday nights. He doesn't play at a powerhouse high school, so it's not like he's putting up gaudy stats. So I think seeing him in that neutral setting was really informative. When you stack him up alongside all of these other top quarterbacks, he looked no different. He can go throw for throw with anybody. So he was one. He's probably the one that I would zero in on. But I think too, I mean, we have him ranked in the top 50, but the Florida State commit Luke Kromenhoek, I think maybe my biggest revelation coming out of that event was he might have the highest upside of anybody. And I think that's saying a lot when you have a guy like Dylan Raiola, you have a guy like DJ Lagway, obviously y'all are very familiar with his Baylor background. Just given how big and just physically developed those two are with their arms, I think I look at Luke Kromenhoek and see a guy kind of like my comp for him is Ryan Tannehill. If he's like 6'3", close to 6'4", 190, kind of a lean frame, but he's going to continue to fill out. Very good athlete. One of the bigger arms there. The way he throws the ball actually reminds me a lot of Ryan Tannehill. So I could see him being a guy that we look at a couple years from now, and he could potentially be a high NFL draft pick, one who just continues to develop. Well, similar to Hauss Hejny, he was a first-year varsity starter as a junior, was playing behind a former Elite 11 quarterback, Holden Gariner, who signed with Auburn. So I think he's one who will probably continue to get better just the more in-game reps he gets. Because that's just – I think – quarterback is such a confidence and experience position. I really enjoy seeing how these guys continue to get better over their high school careers. We put out these early rankings. We identify the Dylan Raiolas when they're in 10th grade, but really a lot of times we don't really know quite how good all these guys are until their senior year. A lot of times when their recruitment's kind of already done. So that's the fun part for me. Whereas the recruitment might be over in most cases, because a lot of these guys are committing this time of year in June. I really enjoy tracking the senior seasons and kind of seeing who improves and who doesn't. But I think a lot of times the Elite 11 can serve as a good point of reference for us, and maybe these guys kind of showing early signs of development, and it's a springboard into their senior year. And I think Luke Kromenhoek, the Florida State commit, and Ethan Buckemeyer, the Penn State commit, are two that I would kind of earmark as ones who I think could have big senior years.
Charles, another guy that got a chance to see up close last year and was impressed by was Will Hammond. And it seems like he's one of those guys that's now starting to gain a lot of steam after what he was able to display, and just more people getting eyes on him. Obviously, he's a part of what right now is a pretty fiery run in recruiting for Joey McGuire and Texas Tech. Your thoughts on him as the quarterback centerpiece in their class, and just how much upside is there with Will Hammond?
Yeah, I think Will Hammond, I came away thinking he's a great fit for what they try to do on offense. I think he fits with Zach Kitley's scheme like just perfectly. He did not have one of the stronger arms there, but he's very accurate, and I could just see him translating into like an air raid system really well. Very accurate and good timing, kind of in the short to intermediate passes. And he's one too, like I think for a typical like air raid quarterback, I think he's going to be a lot more athletic than you typically see. I mean, I think you could put him in a Mike Leach offense, and he could be, could make all those throws and could, throw mesh and Y cross in his sleep. But I think he also has a little more athleticism as well. He's a guy who runs like 4.6. He ran for like 700 yards last year or something like that. So he brings a little extra dimension. But I came away impressed with what we saw. He was very consistent on each day. I think he finished maybe 10th for us in our top 11 rankings from the event. So was definitely in the top half of the group, and I think it was a pretty positive showing for Will Hammond. And I think too, like when you look at what Texas Tech's doing on the recruiting trail, I mean, you have to be impressed. And I think he's going to have some talent around him. I think Texas Tech has done a great job recruiting the offensive line. Like they're trending heavily for the 5-star Micah Hudson, the receiver. So I think it'll be interesting to kind of see, if they kind of build on this momentum they have, because like you said, they've had a pretty pretty strong couple weeks here in June. So if you're Will Hammond, I think you have to be pretty excited, one, with how you looked at the Elite 11, but also, too, the talent that's going to be around you in Lubbock, at least so it appears.
And things have changed, Charles, where you had the rankings for high school players. The transfer portal now has taken over. Is it almost like a pie, a pizza now with different ingredients about how teams can stack their roster and the rankings that go with it?
Mm-hmm. I think it's now more than ever. There's so many different ways you can build a roster, and I think everybody has different philosophies, and I think some of it is tailored to the school. Like, what's your geographic recruiting footprint? I think there's different portal strategies for each team. So it's really interesting. I mean, I think this is a time in college sports, especially college football, that's one of the most transformative couple years, just with NIL and transfer portal and all those different added components into recruiting. I agree with you. It's definitely a very fluid period. And also too, I part of what I do at On3 is I track these guys as true freshmen. I wrote a lot about Richard Reese last fall, just kind of going through and monitoring true freshman performances. And we have guys that were big recruits that were good as true freshmen that are already in the portal and already at another school. So I think it's a deal where, maybe as when we were following this in the past, a recruit's destination was pretty much locked in stone once they sign. Like, they're probably going to finish their career there, at least exhaust their eligibility, maybe do a grad transfer. Whereas now they might be gone the first semester. So it's just, it's just not as settled, but there's definitely a ton of ways to build a roster, and it is interesting to me to see different staffs implement different strategies. And I know that some of it's philosophical, some of it depends on the school.
Charles, don't take this wrong, or any site to take this wrong, but how much do programs try to at least influence the rankings? Does that ever? Not that you let it, but does that happen?
Mm-hmm. It doesn't come across my desk as much as you would think, and we purposely I feel like just for me, I purposely try to filter a lot of information. I'm not talking to college coaches all day. It's not a deal where they're necessarily hitting us up and asking for rankings. So it usually is not one-to-one in terms of the contact. So if they were to reach out, it would probably be through somewhat like a mutual coworker or acquaintance, I guess I would say. So I surprisingly don't get that a ton, which thankfully, because I feel like that would just kind of I think we try to be as independent and arbiter in this situation as possible. And sometimes honestly, you kind of feel a little bit like a referee. Mm-hmm. And just try to come at it with it as honest a perspective as possible. Because really, at the end of the day, my main task is just trying to be as accurate and project as honestly as we can. We try to, our basis is kind of judged off the NFL draft. So I'm really trying to project and peg as many high draft picks as possible as 5-star blue chip recruit type. So that's the objective, and fortunately I don't get a ton of requests or noise with college coaches. But I'll also add, for us, a lot of what we get from college is information. It's kind of, so some of it's subjective, but for us, it's a lot of it's really data and heights, weights, arm lengths, hand sizes. That's really kind of what we get into in terms of asking information from colleges, and that just helps us. The more we know about the prospects, I feel like the more accurate our rankings are. So this time of year for me is very busy from a data collection standpoint, and just trying to get as good of information as we can get, and the most up-to-date information on these prospects. Because a lot of these guys, their bodies look completely different from sophomore year to junior year. So I'm trying to figure out, how much does he weigh? How tall is he? How long are his arms? Is this the right position? But it's a lot of stuff like that, more so than can you make this guy a 4-star? So but yeah, I guess that's a long answer, but it's a fun and definitely it's a fun and very active part of the year in June for sure.
Last thing, you mentioned Tech, and obviously we're waiting. Everyone's waiting eventually what Micah Hudson might make or pull the trigger. We mentioned the running back commitment Texas was able to get today from a state that they do well in Arizona. Is Florida right now among the top teams? Are they the most with a surge at this particular time, or is it somebody else?
I think Florida's up there just because they had so many commits this past weekend. But I think a lot of it just comes in waves. Like I think so a lot of it tends to hinge on who had big visit weekends. So it's very like cyclical and kind of oscillates, I think, with a lot of these teams. I mean, I would definitely peg Texas Tech as one of the hottest teams because I just think they have a lot of positive momentum, and I think for that staff, and probably similar to Florida, it's just the benefit of like a full recruiting cycle. Like they had extended period of time to build relationships with these players. I mean, they probably started talking with a lot of these guys that they're getting commitments from when they were sophomores versus basically speed dating for 1 year or even in that first class a matter of weeks. So I think you're just seeing. I think some of it is just the big weekends these teams have had. We'll just have a lot of their big targets in on one weekend, or just have a really good weekend where they get several and it kind of just builds on like snowballs. But I think also a lot of it is just the taking advantage of just having some staff continuity and ability to build relationships with the prospects dating to when they're sophomores. So I think Florida's for sure in there. But it's this time of year's fun, but a lot of it changes once you put toe to leather, and everybody's undefeated right now. So it always becomes interesting in the fall when teams start getting wins and losses. So
all right, Charles, thanks for your time. We appreciate it. Charles Power, On3.com football lead scout, also